Today we're going to be talking about hyphens, dashes, and parentheses and about what they do. We're going to start with hyphens and talk about their four uses. The first use of a hyphen is to continue a sentence onto another line if there wasn't enough room for the word. For example, over here we have Boeing is one of the world's leaders in aeronautical engineering. Aeronautical is normally one word, but it couldn't fit, so we had to put a hyphen to move it to the next line. The second use of hyphens is for prefixes and suffixes on words that already exist just as a descriptor. For example, self-taught, all-encompassing, ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend, soon-ish, or governor-elect. The third use of hyphens is just to create compound words, like mother-in-law, 2-year-old, and so forth. And the final use for hyphens is just when you write out compound numbers, such as in the sentence, the meaning of life is 42. Now let's look at the one use for the dash. Dashes are used to emphasize a word or a phrase that isn't essential to the sentence itself. For example, I'd better have passed my test. It's 90% of my class grade, or I'll have to go to summer school, would make sense if we took out the it's 90% of my class grade, but it's important, so we emphasize it with the dashes. Now, let's look at the two uses for parentheses. Parentheses are kind of the opposite of dashes. Where dashes emphasize, parentheses will de-emphasize the part that we're cutting out. So for instance here, the 787 Dreamliner, made by Boeing, is the most advanced aircraft known to man. Now if you're writing a paper about Boeing, you don't really need the parentheses, but it helps to clarify that the 787 was created by Boeing. So it's not really necessary, but it's good to have it in there. The second use for parentheses is in a list if you were writing it out. So for example, there are 3 things to learn today: how to use a hyphen, how to use a dash, and how to use parentheses. We don't really need the numbers there, but it helps us see that these are the separate categories. It just kind of emphasizes that, but it shows that the numbers aren't super important. Now, you've probably noticed that when you're using parentheses or dashes, you could replace them with a simple comma, but the comma doesn't really show the type of emphasis that we're wanting to show here. The dashes will again emphasize the part that you're setting apart, but the parentheses will de-emphasize it, meaning it's not as important. But the commas will just kind of mean that it's the same level of importance. It doesn't really matter, but it's also not critical if you know it, whereas the dashes show that it's super important, and the parentheses show that it's not so important, but it's helpful to know.